So simply put, an API gateway is a single entry point that routes client API requests to your backend microservices in your network. So the API gateway is going to function in a very similar way that a reverse proxy might for standard user-facing applications. So you have incoming requests from clients outside of your network. There's some sort of business logic that is applied at the gateway or reverse proxy level, and at that point, those get routed back to the correct API on the back end. Very similar idea for the API gateway, just geared towards APIs and microservices, while also layering on some additional standard categories of functionality that are generally included with an API gateway. So some of those feature categories are outlined here. So they are going to include things like security. So that can mean your IAM type controls, your authentication, your authorization. Generally, your gateways are going to perform some level of traffic management as well. So that can be things like HTTP caching. It can be rate limiting to control the access to your backend services, as well as some degree of observability. So that is generally going to touch on the three main categories there. So your metrics, your tracing, your logging, all handled centrally by this API gateway component as well. So if we take a look at what this would look like from a diagram point of view, you'll see this is an evolution of that previous microservices diagram we were looking at, where previously we had users that were hitting our microservices that had the built-in authentication authorization protocols on each of the applications themselves. In this evolution, we are introducing this API gateway component, which is handling not only the fundamental routing back to the correct service, but also those API gateway feature categories that we saw in the previous slides. So specifically for IAM, if we have multiple protocols or frameworks that are being used across our services, like OIDC, like LDAP, like JWT, that's something that can be handled by the API gateway itself and then proxied back to the services from there. Let's now focus specifically on using Traefik Enterprise as an API gateway. And specifically, we'll be looking at the OpenID Connect capabilities within Traefik Enterprise. So Traefik Enterprise allows us to utilize a number of different authentication middlewares that can be used to secure access to your backend services. One of those is the OpenID Connect authentication middleware. And there are a few main steps for configuring that in an enterprise instance, which we'll see as we pivot to the demo in a few minutes here. But basically what this setup entails is that we're going to specify whatever our OIDC provider is as an authentication source in our static config, so we can centrally point to our identity provider to reuse that across applications. Then for the second step, we're going to reference that authentication source in an OIDC middleware, one or more middlewares depending on our setup. So again, the idea is that we set this up once, we reuse this across lots of different applications to cut down on having to repeat ourselves across the application configuration. So by default, this middleware is going to handle user authentication. So we will basically get redirected and log into our OIDC provider. But optionally, we can also use the middleware to handle certain claim-based authorization as well. So the middleware can basically extract claim data from the ID token that's part of the OIDC standard and check that against certain business rules to ensure that users are accessing only what they're given access to.